Dr. Meenu Singh. I invite her here to talk and enlighten us. She is Professor MD, FAP, FCCP Fellowship, Pediatric Pulmonology, Pittsburgh, and affiliation Executive Director, AIMS Rishikesh. I think you know Dr. Lokesh Tiwari, very good friend of me, and founder, Professor, Pediatric Pulmonology, PGI Chandigarh, and AIMS Rishikesh. Her area of interest is pediatric pulmonology, evidence-based medicine, and her achievement came Warren Award from Cochrane, co-chair in Cochrane, India, president, Telemedicine Society of India, and publication more than 300. Welcome, ma'am. We are waiting to hear from you.
Thank you very much, and I will be discussing with you some the disorders of aerodigestive tract. I'm sure all of you know what is aerodigestive tract. These aerodigestive tract is that area of our body in which you have confluence of the respiratory and the digestive system. As we know that the respiratory system starts with the nose, there is nasopharynx, and then we have a common area which is the oropharynx, and here you have epiglottis which is covering the trachea, and here we have the esophagus which is there. So sometimes if there is a disorder which is leading to, the digestive disorder is actually leading to problems in the respiratory tract, then we call it a aerodigestive disorder. This is just to show you what is the difference in the aerodigestive tract of infant, toddler, and the older child. As you can see, this yellow is the hard palate, this purple is the soft palate and the uvula, and the red part is the tongue. And you can see that in a younger infant, these two tracts are actually very close together, and that's the reason. Yeah, I was trying to use this particular pointer also, but I cannot. So what happens is, as the child grows, then the distance kind of increases between the two, and as we swallow something, the epiglottis closes the respiratory tract, and that is why you do not get too much of aspiration in older people unless they are neurologically compromised. Whereas in younger children, it is very common to have the contents of the swallowed or the swallowed contents, which is mostly food or milk, they can spill over from, rather than going from into the digestive tract, they might even go into the respiratory tract. And that is the reason why many times we have these young babies who present with, whenever they have, and the mothers complain that whenever the child is feeding, he starts coughing. And then we suspect many other disorders as well, which may be more serious in nature. But some of these are very common during early infancy, and as the child grows up, he becomes normal, and these complaints actually disappear. So, but other common problems which lead to aerodigestive disorders in children are gastroesophageal reflux disorder, that is GERD, the swallowing dysfunction, the tracheoesophageal fistula, the aerodigestive foreign bodies, the lesions of the upper airway from nose to trachea, and the lesions of the upper esophagus, which may be due to atlasia, diverticulum, etc. They can also lead to problems of aerodigestive type. Now, gastroesophageal reflux in infants and children, we know that swallowing reflex begins at 16 weeks of gestation, and the baby can suckle by second to third trimester. At 34 weeks, infants can suckle and feed normally, and the pharyngeal phase is developed earlier. The oral preparatory phase is something which is maldeveloped in premature babies, and that is another reason why premature babies may have aerodigestive disorder, although they may have disorders which are due to swallowing dysfunction. So gastroesophageal reflux leads to involuntary passage of gastric contents into the esophagus, and in gastroesophageal reflux disease, Symptoms or complications that may occur when gastric contents reflux into esophagus or oropharynx. In case of regurgitation, there is passage of refluxed gastric contents into oral pharynx, and in case of vomiting, there is expulsion of refluxed gastric contents from the mouth. So when this is something which gets into the respiratory tract, it really causes problems, and the patients can aspirate these fluids and they can have respiratory difficulty. So in gastroesophageal reflux, the infant will throw up after almost every feed, and many times between the feeding also he may throw up, and this is usually done due to an incoordination or immaturity of the upper respiratory tract. Parents often worry that something more is wrong with the baby's stomach. There may be an ulcer, they are not keeping enough food down to grow, so they always worried that these babies are not able to grow because but many times they are growing very well, but the parents are usually concerned that the baby is not able to retain much. So the anti-reflux barrier, which is there in our, it is somewhere here, as you can see that this is the junction between the esophagus and the stomach, and this is the crural part of diaphragm. This is the angle of His in this, when there is a in this connection between the stomach and the esophagus. And this is the intra-abdominal part of esophagus, because this is something which is under the diaphragm. So the lower esophageal sphincter is something which regulates the contents of the stomach to stay inside the stomach, and it would open up only whenever there is a swallowing, and that phase of swallowing there will be opening up of the lower esophageal sphincter, and then it should close. But many times if the sphincter doesn't close, then the contents which are there in the stomach, they can come back into the esophagus, and we know that in adults they cause several problems because of the acid which is present. They can lead to Barrett's esophagus. They can also cause gastroesophageal reflux and sometimes bad throat, which can occur in these patients. And even sinusitis sometimes can occur because of reflux of these contents from stomach to esophagus. So this is what is transient lower esophageal sphincter relaxations which may occur. This is the pH which is being measured. The pH, if it goes down as it is going from the upper part to the lower part of the esophagus, then in the pharynx, this is what will happen. In the esophageal body, you again have all these fluctuations which are there in the pressure if you're doing manometry. And then in the lower esophageal sphincter, sometimes there is opening up of the lower esophageal sphincter. And these are the various muscles which guard this lower esophageal sphincter, which is present in the body. So esophageal capacitance, we were just listening that there is something called as resistance, and there is something which is known as capacitance. Capacitance is when you allow the contents of the esophagus to pass into the stomach, and this is how it happens with gravity in older individuals because they are upright, but an infant is actually, the infant is flat, so this capacitance is actually increased and the resistance is decreased in the babies. So the airway protective mechanisms which are there is that upper esophageal sphincter contracts whenever there is a small volume which reaches the lower part. But if there is a large volume, then the vagal reflexes will come up, the vocal cords will close, the central apnea may occur, and upper esophageal sphincter relaxes. And then this refluxate sometimes enters the pharynx, and swallowing, it then clears the pharynx, and the respiration resumes. So this is what happens in an episode when the regurgitation may occur. So there are certain pathogenic mechanisms in gastroesophageal reflux disease, and they are the mechanisms which lead to this is transient lower esophageal junction relaxation, increase in intra-abdominal pressure, reduced esophageal capacitance, gastric compliance, and delayed gastric emptying. If that is also there, then there's more chance that the contents of the stomach will come up. There are mechanisms of esophageal complications sometimes because if there is an impaired esophageal clearance, there is a defective tissue resistance which may be present, or there is a noxious composition of the refluxate. In those situations also, there will be an esophageal complication. And mechanisms of airway complications are related to vagal reflexes and impaired airway protection which may occur because of this. So the common symptoms which these patients clinically would have, they would have frequent or recurrent vomiting. They may have heartburn if they are old enough to complain it, or they may have, they're just kind of, they have gas, or sometimes they are very mucousy, or sometimes they just have salivation, or they assume very different kind of postures when they are sleeping, or sometimes they may complain of abdominal pain. So the diagnosis is usually made by hearing the parent's story and seeing the child, the child. That is sometimes enough to determine this problem. A few diagnostic tests that are given when further testing is recommended, they may be barium swallow or upper GI series. We may do pH probe or what is known as esophageal manometry or pH measurements and endoscopy. So barium swallow X-ray allows doctors to follow the food down the infant's esophagus into the intestines, and the doctor is able to see if there are twists, kinks, or narrowings of the upper intestinal tract, and sometimes these are not very reliable. pH probe studies are performed by the use of small wire with an acid sensor. It starts at the infant's nose and ends at the bottom of the esophagus. The sensor is left in place for 12 to 24 hours. And the severity of the reflux does not always correlate with the severity of the symptoms, because sometimes the symptoms are out of proportion to what is measured on the acid reflux. So esophageal pH monitoring, this is how it is done, and the cannula which is inside the esophagus, and this is the machine which would then measure the esophageal pH. Now, GI endoscopy is something which would be done with the help of a flexible endoscope with lights and lenses are passed through the infant's mouth, and it would pick up esophagitis. That is when it is actually with gastroendoscopy due to repeated exposure of the esophagus to stomach. Because of acid, one may find esophagitis, and less than half of the infants with severe symptoms do not develop esophagitis. So this is actually a picture of the esophagogastroduodenoscopy, in which one can find that there are some erythema and marooning of the tissues which are there in the esophagus and the stomach. Another investigation which has come into play these days is called FEES. It is functional endoscopic evaluation of swallowing dysfunction in infants. It is an investigation which is difficult to perform, but is quite confirmatory, and you can actually visualize the contents of what has been ingested to be passing into the respiratory tract. And here, although sometimes so you have to first take consent of the parents that this is a procedure which will confirm whether the aerodigestive tract is coordinating well or not. And sometimes a little bit of reflux can occur, and so the substance that you have to use for swallowing has to be very innocuous. It could be a very dilute solution containing methylene blue, which is colored, and you can actually follow it. Otherwise, sometimes even if you give a little bit of orange juice, because that is orange in color, and it's taken by the children willingly, or sometimes even with milk. With younger infants, one can just do it with milk and then see where the milk is going. So what happens is that, like in this child, after an endoscope is passed up to the level of nasopharynx, when you can visualize the epiglottis and the structures which are just below the epiglottis, which is the vocal cords. This is the pyriform fossa. And you can see that even in the pharynx, there are a lot of nodularity which is there, and that can also, so here the child has ingested something, and this bluish dye which has come in, this is something which is seen, which is in the pyriform fossa now, which should actually just go into the esophagus. Normally it should not spill over. It should not go around the the epiglottis and other places, but and if this solution is more, it might even go into the esophagus through the opening. So one has to take a precaution not to give too much of the fluid which is going into because it can go into the respiratory tract and can lead to aspiration. So one has to make the procedure absolutely safe, but of course in experienced hands this procedure is quite safe. and people have done like thousands of fees these days. This is, I think we have already seen, and you can see that here some of that substance is actually going inside the larynx and it is spilled all over. So otherwise now, after you've confirmed the diagnosis, the treatment is basically positioning the baby, because after feeding, put the baby on his stomach and elevate the head. That is one way. The other thing is that we ask these babies to be nursed in a kind of driving, you know, what you have these chairs which are used for babies as driving seats. And they can also be used, not on their beds, in which the baby is put in there, and he may have less of aspiration, because then the resistance of the esophageal sphincter is kind of ensured. Then changing the feeding schedules is also very important, because feed the baby smaller amounts and more often is something which is helpful. The dietary treatments, the parents are instructed to thicken their infant's formula with cereal, and sometimes that helps, and then aspiration may not take place. And sometimes these studies are also done with different sort of consistency of the fluid which is ingested. Like you may give a jelly, first you've given juice, then you may give a jelly, or give a little bit of solid food, and then see whether the aspiration is occurring or not. And that kind of food which is producing the least amount of aspiration is the food consistency which could be preferred in that particular patient. So the medications which are used, we know that anti-secretory and prokinetic medications are used. Metoclopramide is one of the agents which is there, and sometimes people tend to use even lansoprazole in some of these babies if they want to decrease the acidity. Surgery is used rather rarely, but Nissen's fundoplication is one of the surgeries which is used. And mainly these mechanisms which are used to restore intra-abdominal segment of the esophagus, and then this plication which occurs, sometimes you have to reduce the hiatus hernia, which may be present, and we wrap the fundus around the lower esophageal sphincter to reinforce the anti-reflux barrier in these patients. So esophageal flap closure is another form of surgery. Glottic closure is another one, in which if the glottis has become very roomy and it is something which is sucking the food particles inside, then one may have to do the glottis closure also. That means narrowing of the glottis, which is mostly done by the ENT surgeons, and that can also be practiced. We had seen a case which is known as Soferman syndrome, in which when you put a nasogastric tube, sometimes because of the pressure on the larynx, this regurgitation starts happening, and that is something which we should take care of. So these are some of the cases which I wanted to show, but I think the time is already up. And is it up? No, it's okay. So basically, I'll just show you one case. So this patient had frequent episodes of running nose and cough, and total 10 to 12 episodes without associated retractions. Child had received nebulizations for these, as is very common for many of these patients to get. And there was no previous hospitalizations. The anthropometry showed compromise. There was chronic malnutrition. There was pallor. The AF was open. There were multiple hypopigmented macules of 3:3 millimeters over the anterior abdominal wall in a concentric fashion, as you can see in this particular patient's picture. And in respiratory tract, there was nasal flaring, and in the lower respiratory tract, the work of breathing was increased, and there were low chest in drawings. And palpation had similar findings. On auscultation, breath sounds were heard with equal intensity, which were normal, but there were creps bilaterally, right more than left, in the inframammary and infraxillary region. So this was an 8-month-old child, symptomatic for last 5 weeks, with persistent symptoms of pneumonia and failure to thrive. And all the workup which was done on this particular patient, this was the chest X-ray, which showed bilateral hyperinflation, and there was some opacity here around around the trachea in the paratracheal region. And it becomes a little more prominent over here. And then we did a GR scan, esophagogram, HIV was ruled out, TB was ruled out, cystic fibrosis was ruled out. But then on upper GI series, one could see that this contrast, which was flowing into the esophagus, was actually spilling into the trachea, and this was a case of a tracheoesophageal fistula. So this is the kind of cases which sometimes get picked up when you work up these patients, and sometimes even on bronchoscopy, one can see those small openings which may be there in these patients. So this was an H type of tracheoesophageal fistula, which is a communication between the posterior wall of the trachea. And this can be symptomatic after birth, but sometimes the diagnosis may be delayed in these patients. So this is the flexible fiber optic endoscopy of this particular patient, and you can see that this is where the fistulous opening is in this particular child. So I think rather than going into further discussion about these individual conditions, I would finish my talk and take up any questions if they are there. I can show more cases if required. I think I've already finished the time. So.
Thank you, ma'am. Wonderfully explained about this aerodigestive disorder, one thing we face in our everyday practice. And I think you all enjoyed her session. Once again, thanks, ma'am. Any question from audience?
Ma'am, how long do we continue metoclopramide?
Actually, one should not give it for a very long time. And sometimes if the patient has to respond, they would respond within 2 weeks' time. So giving it for very
will not
long
the reflex
periods.
again occur? I mean, once we have stopped the drug,
Yes.
the reflux might occur back again because the basic anatomy remains the same.
So that is why one has to look at other solutions also. But 2 to 6 weeks actually is the period that you may extend it up to 2 to 6 weeks. And during this period, most of the patients who have to respond, they would have responded, and with correction of their postural kind of correction, this may become like a treatment which is otherwise transitory in nature, if the defect is transitory in nature. If there is a definite anatomical defect, then it would need further treatment.